Thank you. Thank you. I'm an artist, and one of the subjects that I revisit through my work is race. As a part of my practice, I facilitate workshops on race and racism, and in workshops which I organize specifically for white people, I've been told several times that Europeans find it difficult to hear or use the word race. Some of the participants have explained to me that this word was used incorrectly in the past. Human beings are one race, but dogs, for example, have several races. This explanation, this idea, this definition is in many ways incomplete. In these discussions about the word race, pseudoscience is cited as the sole carrier responsible for validating racial hierarchies and naming white people as the master race. What I often feel compelled to point out is that it wasn't pseudoscience alone which engendered the complex systems and structures of race and racism. As a person of color, I can't forget that science, religion, education, philosophy, art, literature, media, and politics were also used to propagate the myth of white supremacy, and that today people of color continue to be racialized through various agents of socialization. I write about race, I read about race, I speak about race, and I facilitate conversations about race on a regular basis. Yet I continue to find myself baffled by the things that white people overlook or ignore while clinging to a worldview which is deeply racist. The white person that I seem to meet over and over again in work and in life, and the white people that I observe interviewing authors, academics, activists, historians, and journalists who happen to be people of color who focus on race, often present themselves as having a neutral, objective point of view on this subject. This is a perspective that people of color are never afforded. We are thought of as being incapable of defining our experiences with racism and white supremacy. Whether publicly or privately, when we speak about the impact that race and racism have on our lives, our experiences are negated. We are accused of engaging in identity politics. We are described as people who make victims of ourselves. In other words, we are not credible witnesses, capable of explaining how the constructs of the societies that we live in and move through function. And of course, when I'm struck by the gravity of this reality, I remind myself, but this is what racism does. This is what racism was meant to do. We have never been thought of as reliable witnesses. We have never been victims of slavery, colonialism, genocide, or racial terror. We have always been subjects, and as such, we have always been expected to remain silent. What if one by one, piece by piece, we silenced our detractors by exposing how flawed and illogical a neutral, objective, and therefore white perspective is on race? We could begin by deconstructing key elements of this device which make their way into our conversations at work, on the street, with friends and family members, and even people we sometimes find ourselves building a life with. While working my way through explaining why it's impossible for white people to speak about race from a neutral, objective point of view, there are two statements that I would like to zero in on. The first statement is more of a claim, which you might be familiar with if you've ever had a conversation with a white person about race. Racism doesn't exist. The second statement is really more of a command, which insists that when we speak about race, we need to stop talking about the past. It's 20, you fill in the year, because 10 years from now, people of color will likely be expected to have complex conversations about race which ignore racist histories. What's ironic about these declarations and demands is that the white person likely to make either statement believes that they are making a statement which is rational, fair, well-informed, and in alignment with common knowledge. In truth, these statements are irrational. They are uninformed, lending themselves to validate and perpetuate racial injustice. But the white person making these statements is correct in the assumption that their assertions about race are common knowledge, and this cultural frame of reference will be informed and supported by other white people. In 2016, Hannah Ingber of the New York Times published an article about a series of photographs that I took, which document my experiences with anti-Black racism in Germany. Titled Things You Can Tell Just by Looking at Him, this project consists of self-portraits where I'm wearing t-shirts with racial slurs, microaggressions, and other racially problematic comments which have been directed at me personally over the last 11 years. In some cases, text featured on select t-shirts disclosed fear, apathy, and an inability to deal with the subject of race. This ongoing series archives how race and racism, as it is coded in our social consciousness, moves through language. As I experience more and more racism, this piece will expand. Things that you can tell just by looking at him illustrates where racism intersects with other aspects of my identity, including my status as a non-EU migrant and as a person who identifies as gay or queer. Here are some images from the series. Today, I'm wearing a more recent entry, waiting to be included in this dark diary. Your ways are strange to us as Europeans, the t-shirt reads. This was the way that one of my colleagues explained, your foreign way of doing things is incompatible with our ways of communicating and presenting ourselves. When I explained that the real issue is that I'm not supposed to be here, not because I'm not talented, hardworking, or articulate, but because Europe has never conceived of Black bodies existing outside of certain spaces, occupying roles reserved for the master class. That's when the conversation began to break down, as these conversations often do. I'm well accustomed with being reminded that there are many people who feel that I don't belong here. 6 weeks ago, a white man threatened to kill me in a burger joint because, well, I told him that if he wanted me to move out of his way, that I believed the European way of doing so is to say, excuse me. He had touched me without warning, and I was still surprised when he pushed me into the other patrons waiting to order. He then circled around me and said, behave yourself. In other words, know your place. And I know that as a Black person living in this society, that my place is far below his own. When this man said, I will kill you right here, it was also implicit that the rage and the anger that he felt in being challenged by a racial subject was informed by the constructs of race and the racist society that we live in. Does racism exist is not and can never be an objective question or point of view. As people of color, we are never simply citizens. We have hyphenated identities which sometimes precede and interrupt our concepts of where we come from, which cultures we feel at home in, and maybe these add-ons and prefixes obstruct how we define ourselves. White Europeans have on several occasions asked me questions like, where are you really from? Where are your parents from? Where did you come from before America, before I was born? What are your roots? They reject a narrative, a very real story, which counters racist anecdotes which have been coded onto my skin. The intense desire to categorize my foreignness is never the curiosity that they have when meeting white people from South Africa, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, or the United States. Trees have roots. As a human being, I am part of a lineage. And so it's surreal to be asked where I come from in the land where Africa was divided. I am as American as America's history with slavery and genocide, and I am American because of slavery and genocide. In Germany, it's not uncommon to hear white Germans refer to themselves as simply German, while racializing so-called others as African, Asian, or Turkish. Sometimes I want to ask, how do you know if this German person that you're speaking about is from Turkey, Cameroon, or China? These descriptors are not neutral. They are clues to who belongs and who has a point of origin which can be located elsewhere. And this is particularly evident when a person of color has done something which is perceived as foreign, alien, irritating, or annoying. While I reflect on this, I don't wish to repeat the racism that I've heard, so I will share details from my own personal conversations. A neighbor recently asked me, "Do you have trouble sleeping with your windows open? Those non-white men in the cafe below us are so loud." An ex once exclaimed, "These non-white people are so aggressive and homophobic, and it's because of their fundamentalist religion that we have problems with homophobia in Germany." Another example that sticks out was a time when a friend said, "This non-white guy stole my wallet. Being the only person of color at the table, I looked for signs of disapproval. A flash of red across rosy cheeks, a subtle shift in posture, a blink of the eyes that came out of, well, not nowhere, but out of recognizing that people steal, and being non-white has nothing to do with being a thief." When no one said anything, when these good, well-educated, well-traveled, young white people remained silent, I asked, "Did you tell us that a non-white person stole your wallet so that we wouldn't imagine a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person stealing your wallet?" There are quite a lot of things that white people who insist that racism doesn't exist gloss over. First, there are the lived experiences of people like myself, people of color. But one of the things I rarely hear them comment on is how they feel about the racial prejudices and practices of other white people. Sure, you will on occasion hear nonsensical, classist comments such as, "The problem is education, and it's the uneducated who simply don't know any better." Remember the images that I shared with you from things you can tell just by looking at him? You have no culture because you come from slaves? She's the director of a preschool. We never had colonies? While not a racist comment, is a racist statement which ignores colonial violence inflicted by a German government and the genocide of the Herero Nama people, also perpetrated by a German government. 3 German journalists made this or similar comments while interviewing me about my own work, but the first time that I heard this lie, it came from someone who works from the German parliament. Foreigners should be forced to learn German. He's a general practitioner who speaks 5 European languages, but fears that foreigners in the train who speak languages which he doesn't understand must be talking about him. This is why we come here. As I said, this is a classist idea which leaves much to be explained about the various forms of racism that people of color experience: structural racism, systemic racism, sexual racism, everyday racism. There are several examples which contrast this unconventional wisdom. I'm thinking about an important German politician who once said that multiculturalism has utterly failed in Germany, not because Germany actively tried to transition into a multicultural society, but because the others were expected to leave, and well, they didn't. Recently, a French politician boldly declared that Africa has a civilization problem. This is the Europe that we live in and are a part of. I'm a pop culture enthusiast, and when I hear fashion houses and movie studios explain why there aren't more people of color on runways, billboards, or TV screens, they often cite clients or an audience which has trouble relating to people who don't look like them. There's something disturbing about not being interested in a movie with 3-dimensional characters who happen to be people of color in supporting or lead roles. The audience that they are referring to is predominantly white and in possession of a disposable income. And in that place where we go to escape or to have moments of recognition, the white people named and unnamed by these designers and studio executives don't even want to see us in their fantasies. We are always out of place. To say that racism does not exist is also to ignore the current work of historians, social scientists, academics, activists, local and international laws meant, in theory, to protect the rights of people of color. But this common knowledge, this cultural frame of reference, grants white people the ability to render that which is clearly visible completely invisible. Even the past or his story can be dismissed. I'm sick of talking about the past. That has nothing to do with me. You people are always talking about the past. Get over it. We've moved on. We're not responsible for what they did. This disavowal of a racist past at the juncture where we are speaking about a racist present is unoriginal but very pervasive. What can you say when confronted with these demands? I've started imagining how silly it would be to hear a judge say that they will make a fair, balanced judgment on an issue presented to them without investigating the history of this particular issue. Sometimes I imagine a supposedly brilliant scientist tasked with curing a vicious disease angrily dismiss all that is known about the origins of this disease. When I hear white people make comments like these, I want to say, this is exactly how you sound. This willfully uninformed directive, which claims that the past has nothing to do with the present, is a desperate maneuver to avoid a series of questions that no white person can answer. What comes after racism? How do you successfully, as Grada Columba phrased it, dismantle racism? What does your nation imagine as an anti-racist future? What led to the desire to undo race and racism? This is a question that every white person who claims that racism doesn't exist, that it doesn't matter, must answer. If you lost hold of colonial territories because of a revolution, or because another nation took this territory by force, if you took everything worth taking and left, or if you found a way to take what was yours remotely, if you ended slavery because of civil war, only to create apartheid or segregation, if you were forced to stop committing genocide due to pressures from other nations, what was your motivation from reinvesting in a racist, white supremacist worldview? How do you move on from a racist past which includes rape, murder, physical abuse, enforced labor, the destruction of families, communities, histories, and cultures, genocide? Where in history can we look back and see white people in the UK, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, the United States, Brazil, or Australia answer a set of questions which Toni Morrison posed in an interview with Charlie Rose? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? Are you still smart? Do you still like yourself? What happened when white people admitted to themselves and to all of the people that they oppressed that neither God, nor science, nor philosophy, nor culture made them inherently superior or above all other human beings? What happens when you've told yourself that you're the best and you've cheated, stolen, and killed to command this position? What happens when you finally admit that this was all a lie which you used to oppress others? How do you even begin to repair the damage that you've done to those that you've deemed inferior, while also repairing the damage that you've done to yourselves? I have so many questions for white people who cling to the myth of a neutral, objective point of view in discussions about race and racism. What I expect from those who speak from this imaginary platform is a very real desire to disengage with the social realities of race, with a history of racism which informs our racist present. In our experiences with racism and white supremacy, as witnesses, we continue to reflect what is truly savage, backwards, and uncivilized about the societies that we live in. And for this reason, they continue to silence us.